I recognized her deliberately so that she would be on the spot. No, just kidding.
Thank you. All right. So first tell me your name and your title and your connection to Convergence.
My name is Jean Bordewick, and I'm a program officer at the Madison Initiative of the William and Hewlett. Can I start over? Sorry,
Yeah,
got the name of my
absolutely.
company wrong. Okay, tell me when to start. You want to start over?
Okay. Tell me your name and your affiliation and how you're connected to Convergence.
My name is Jean Bordewick. I work at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. I'm a program officer there in the Madison Initiative, which is their U.S. democracy program. My connection to Convergence comes through our budget process portfolio, which is a set of grants that are made by Hewlett to try to strengthen the budget and appropriations process in Congress. So Convergence is currently a grantee in that portfolio.
Okay, great. So why did the Hewlett Foundation decide to fund our budget project?
The initial idea actually came to us from Stuart Butler at Brookings. He had been leading a national budgeting roundtable, which was an effort to generate new ideas, mostly from scholars, about how to strengthen the process. And also Convergence was an organization we had heard about but had never funded before. The idea was that the Convergence process might be something that could model a more bipartisan effort at policymaking in Congress. So it was the first time endeavor for us, and it really came to us through Stuart Butler at Brookings.
Pause there for a minute,
Yeah.
because I think these people outside for.
I should have said, is he on your board or is he a
He is.
consultant? Should I
No.
redo that and talk about it? So I could say he was on your board and that he had been leading the budgeting roundtable and he recommended it to us.
You don't have to. It's
Okay. We funded him at Brookings, which is why I said that.
Yeah.
And I realized later, oh, I should have said he's, whatever, okay. What's this video for?
We're definitely going to use clips of it for social media.
Okay.
We may put some of it together, like for, we sometimes do smaller clips of like what people say about Convergence, so like we'll sprinkle
Okay.
them on the website, and we may put some of it together in a longer form piece.
Great. So
So
I'll
we-
try to say something that's social media worthy, but if I don't, just keep asking me questions.
All
Okay.
right. And you only need 30 seconds.
I would
for
say
social
short is
media.
better.
Right.
Okay.
All right. Don't worry about that though, because we can always clip it. So just
Okay.
better you talk naturally, and
Okay.
and if you want to say if you want to say something again, or it's fine. We can do it. We can do whatever. So can you talk a little bit about how Convergence, how the project B3P and Convergence contributes to the Madison Initiative's goals of fostering bipartisan problem solving in Congress?
Yes, I'd be happy to. We try many different ways to promote bipartisan problem solving in Congress through our grant making. One of them is to build bipartisan relationships within the House and the Senate, both among staff members and among members themselves. This was a new effort for us, which was to try to build a bipartisan coalition outside of Congress, but with people who influence decision-making in Congress because they're experts in their particular areas of policy and because they have members of their organizations who are constituents of the members of the House and the Senate. So for us, it was an experiment to see whether this model of having an external coalition that was bipartisan in nature would be able to help trigger more action inside the institution.
Pause. We got a lot of the sirens on that one.
Do it over again?
Yeah, we can do it.
Was that a useful answer, or should I just repeat it, or do you want me to say something different?
Particularly the part at the end where you were sort of, where you were really focused on what's unique about, you were talking about,
The external coalition.
correct. And
Being
you were-
helping to trigger action
right,
inside.
yes.
Okay,
Yeah, but,
I'll focus on that.
all right.
So ask me again.
Yeah, so how does B3P Convergence contribute to the Madison Initiative's goals of fostering bipartisan problem solving in Congress?
This is actually an experiment for us. Most of our grant making is around supporting conversations and relationship building inside the institution of Congress. We work through nonprofits that have activities and briefings for members of congressional staff and members of Congress themselves. But this is a different approach. By building a coalition outside of Congress, which consists of organizations that perhaps represent constituents back home, universities and organizations like that, and of experienced Washington people who have deep policy knowledge, but who also are accustomed to the ways that Congress gets things done. So we're looking to see whether this external coalition, having already gone through the process of considering policy options, could then translate inside the institution to try to trigger action there.
And so I'm just going to ask you a follow-up question to that. So given that, what are you seeing now that you are seeing it play out in Congress?
Getting things done in Congress is usually a combination of preparation and opportunity, like so much of life. And that certainly has been our good fortune with this project. We have spent 4 or 5 years actually making grants to scholars and nonprofits that have tried to develop ideas for budget process reform. But when it comes to Congress, ideas are great, but they'll never get anything done by themselves. You have to have the people and the process, and most important, you have to have the moment of opportunity. This project was incredibly lucky that the moment of opportunity, or the window of opportunity, opened right when the process at Convergence had come to a conclusion and the report and the recommendations were ready to migrate into Congress and start to get attention there.
So describe what you see that B3P has accomplished, other than what you've already said, and your hopes for the future of the project.
I think about the B3P process in several ways in terms of its success. So our hope was just that we would show through this process that it was possible to find areas of consensus in the budget process as a sort of stepping stone to policy making. That has been accomplished very well, and it wasn't easy getting there. And the whole convergence process, it required an incredible amount of follow-up and getting people together over and over again and working through very difficult issues and proposals. I think secondly, and probably more than we had hoped for, was that the convergence team and the big coalition that it had put together would be ready to educate people on Capitol Hill about these opportunities, the proposals, at a time when they were receptive. That happened once the Joint Select Committee was set up. People in Congress are very busy, and they're not going to pay a lot of attention to anything that isn't timely. The fact that this is now timely has made the success even greater than we had expected. As for the future, the timing is pretty clear. The Joint Select Committee is scheduled to make a report and hopefully recommendations to Congress in November. And if there is a lame duck session this year, they actually could pass something without having to start over again next Congress. So I guess even beyond our wildest dreams would be if some sort of incremental changes were made in the budget process as a result of the Joint Committee and the convergence work combined. It's too early to tell if that will happen.
So what do you think is unique or different about Convergence, let's say, than your other grantees, or just in general? What's really unique about Convergence from your vantage point?
Our other grantees don't focus on solving a particular problem that has to do with Congress's legislative activity. We don't fund issues, for example. We don't try to bring people together around education reform or foreign policy legislation or anything like that. Process is a little bit different because this is neutral, outcome neutral, and yet it still ultimately requires Congress to act. So in that sense, it's unique just in the content. But I think what's also unique is the process for us. We don't have any other grantee that attempts to build a coalition of stakeholders across the ideological spectrum to focus on a particular problem. We build relationships, we fund oversight training in Congress, but this coalition that we hope can translate into bipartisan support within Congress by activating their own members and their own constituencies is a different model, and one which we hope can be replicated.
And when you just share a couple of thoughts or anecdotes with me. You've come to a lot of our meetings. You've been on the phone with us now that we're past the dialogue. Couple of things that have struck you that you've learned as a result of all this.
One thing that impressed me was how much legwork this takes to pull off. And talking with you and with Susan Willey and other people involved in the project, Mike, of course, now is working with Emily on Capitol Hill. It's just doggedness, keeping people to coming back to the table, following up for people who couldn't make it but need to be briefed to be ready, going to see congressional offices. You don't just send an email and get an appointment. Usually it takes a lot of effort and repetition. And then even once you get an appointment, you can't just let it drop there. You've got to follow up. So for me, seeing the degree of detailed, dogged follow-up that Convergence consistently displayed was really impressive. I think also that the nature of the recommendations was very interesting, because the coalition had to find sort of the right level to pitch it at. They did look at a lot of ideas that are pretty much always out there, like biannual budgeting or biannual appropriations. Those things have been around, kicking around a long time. But looking into them at the level of, well, what if Congress actually was going to vote on this? What would be the objections? Who would be the proponents? Like, what is good about this proposal, but what are the real problems with it if you were going to turn this into actual legislation? And I feel that the Convergence team went much deeper than the level of a good idea, which there are a lot of those floating around Washington, to the much harder level of the nitty-gritty of how would you actually implement this? What would be the barriers you would encounter on Capitol Hill, because you've got 535 members. Any one of them can decide to object or say they don't like it. And so it's a lot of persuasion. And this coalition, I felt, understood what those likely objections and barriers would be. The coalition itself, we hope, will be a kind of a safe space where people across the ideological spectrum could go to for advice or understanding of, well, how did you get to this consensus? But I felt the level of the recommendations was something that was pitched about right. Not too vague and not too detailed, because either one of those would be less likely to get attention on Capitol Hill.
And anything else you want to add?
Let's see. What do you think I should add?
I don't know that I have something specific in my mind.
Well, let me just say this. So don't want to add anything. I understand that this was a different type of project for Convergence as well, which is to say that issues like education or criminal justice reform or healthcare have very well established constituencies among think tanks, policy experts, and so forth. But budget process reform, the people who really, really dig into the budget process are few and far between. And they generally aren't in the kind of organizations that you brought together where they have constituencies or members or interests. And so getting people from those areas to sort of migrate into seeing a process as something that they should care about was quite a challenge. So I think for you, at Convergence, it was something new and not clear from the outset that it would work, because people here are really busy. Like, this is not their top priority. How do you keep them engaged? It's very difficult. And for us, it was also new, but it was a manifestation of what we theoretically want to see as a way of the country solving problems, and realizing that you can't get to yes on everything, you can't find agreement on everything, but maybe if we can agree on principles and process, we can make a lot more progress than we are right now.
Okay.
Is that
Great.
okay? Did
Yeah.
you get some 30-second thing in there?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.